Hello and welcome to Note Doctors. My name is Paul.
My name is Jenn.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In this podcast, we will be talking about all things theory with some of the best music theory teachers in the country. If you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome again to Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation on timbre with none other than Dr. Megan Lavengood. So Ben, tell us a little bit more about Dr. Lavengood.
Sure. Megan Lavengood is Assistant Professor and Director of Music Theory at George Mason University. Her research primarily deals with popular music, timbre, synthesizers, and recording techniques. Her current research project focuses on topic theory in video game music. Before COVID, she was a soprano in a Renaissance quartet.
And I do need to make one more statement here. After we recorded, I realized I made a mistake in something that I said. And I know our listeners count on us to, speak the truth, give the facts, have journalistic integrity. I was talking about a Fred Armisen stand-up bit about percussionists, and during the interview I said that he claimed that percussionists or drummers always describe their cymbals as warm, when in fact in the real bit he says percussionists describe their cymbals as dark. So I wanted to clear that up before we get any hate mail or complaints, because we live in a world of misinformation, and if you can't count on the Note Doctors to give you the truth, who can you count on really? Who can you, Ben? I don't even know. So I just wanted to clear the air with that. So when you get to that, just kind of ignore that or just think about dark is the actual adjective that was used in Fred Armisen's joke there. But let's get on to the episode.
For video game music, there is still, it's great because there's use of traditional tonal idioms, but then there's also pop idioms and jazz idioms and atonal idioms. Like you can find anything in video game music.
So today our very special guest is Dr. Megan Lavengood. We are so excited to have you on our show to talk about timbre, synthesizers, pop music, maybe even some NSYNC. Maybe we get to talk about some NSYNC or Britney Spears maybe. But we are so delighted to have you on. But we always like to start each episode with just asking our guests a little bit about how they got into music theory. And so, for you, how did you get into music theory, and what was your gateway theory textbook? What was it? Was it a Benward, Constant Main?
Yeah, I think we used the Clendenning Marvin at Ohio University when I was there.
So that was an early edition.
Yeah, it was teal. So that's how many. That was several colors ago now. I think that is the first edition. Yeah.
Most people go by the colors too. That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly. I always knew I wanted to be a music major. I started piano lessons when I was very young, and just did a lot of music activities my whole life. And I started as a piano performance major, but I really hated practicing, and especially things like scales and arpeggios, and like really getting the finesse was not my jam. I just wanted to read as much music as quickly as possible, and it just was not turning out to be a very good fit. But I didn't know, I was like having a bit of an identity crisis, because I was like, but music is what I do. This is my thing, and I'm good at it in other ways, but I'm not good at it. Like, I don't care about my trills. Like, they're good enough, But someone was like, well, you're good in music theory class. Have you thought about majoring in music theory? And I was like, can you do that? And they were like, yeah, you can do that. And I was like, interesting. And so I talked to my theory professor, and she was like, yep, we have a music theory major. You could do that. You'll have to write a bunch of papers, take a bunch of theory classes, and do some composition as well. And I was like, yeah, that all sounds pretty fun. So, and then I just stayed in school the whole time, just got all my degrees in music theory. It's turned out it definitely plays to my strengths better than piano performance. I still enjoy playing piano a lot, but just for fun. Mm-hmm. And I started singing when I lived in New York. I started singing in Renaissance quartets, started getting paid for that, so that was cool. But the pandemic kind of murdered that for me. So still do music, but the thing about, I brought up the Renaissance quartets because they're the gigs are church gigs, and we're just sight reading new repertoire every week. And so it's like that kind of thing. That kind of thing is my jam. I love, like, let's throw this together a half hour before service, mm-hmm. and if you mess up, you got to keep going because we're not stopping. That's how I like to approach performance.
Yeah, that would be a fun thing to take your aural skills students to, because that's like in real time, like, let's see how it actually works, because we tell our students all the time, keep going, look ahead, all these things, and you are doing it, every Sunday, right?
I'm totally out of touch with teaching aural skills, because that was just that's what I did for such a long time, and so to me, it doesn't stress me out. I'm very confident. It's just normal to me. So yeah, I try not to teach aural skills to anybody, because I'm like, come on, isn't it fun? Aren't you excited? Keep going. What's wrong?
Right.
Well, I think one of the things in aural skills training, we often prioritize pitch over rhythm and flow. Mm-hmm. And in reality, when you are singing, if you're performing or sight reading something, rhythm and flow is way more important than pitch accuracy. Yeah. You can sing a wrong note and keep going, and most people aren't going to know. Mm-hmm. But if you stop or, have a halt in your rhythm, everyone's going to know. So I've thought a lot about that in the last few years, kind of changed how I grade aural skills, because I used to make pitch worth more than rhythm, and eventually I was like, why? It's not more important. It's just as important that a student get from A to Z, without stopping.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a hard thing to I remember when I was learning piano as a kid, too, having really overcome the stutter impulse, when you mess something up, to keep trying to hit it again. But luckily I had a teacher that was like, don't do that, never do that. And he would just be like, every time I did it, until I stopped doing it. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. Totally. and you're not alone. I feel like most people stumble upon music theory. It's this secret that we didn't know existed, and then it's a professor or a teacher is like, hey, by the way, what about this? And you're like, that's where I need to be. I think Gary Karpinski has been our only guest who was like, I knew I wanted to do music theory when I was 15 years old or something like that.
Yeah, well, who knows that it's even a thing?
Right. Yeah, maybe we need to get ourselves out there and we exist.
There are dozens of us.
Dozens.
Tens and tens. That's all our listenership, actually. The tens and tens of music theorists. And so now, pivoting from your experience singing Renaissance music and things like that, much of what you have kind of been doing recently, scholarly work, has been in analyzing popular music, and particularly looking at aspects of popular music that are not tied to exclusively pitch or meter or harmony. And so talk to us a little bit about what your interest is in pop music in those other areas like timbre, and how we can teach those things to our students.
When I read your interview questions, I was like, because the truth is I don't really teach timbre to my undergraduate students. And it's because I'm afraid I won't be able to rein it in enough to teach it to them in an effective way. It's also just a little bit of cowardice, I think, because I've heard people say that they've taught that article to their undergraduate students with much success, but for some reason I'm like, no, it's not going to work. So I haven't done it yet. But I teach to my graduate students all the time, and it works great. So I don't know what the problem is for me. But anyway, Yeah, I've always been attracted to timbre. When I was first trying to, I was one of those people that didn't know what my dissertation was going to be about until like the last possible minute. I thought first I was like, should I do pop music stuff or should I do like Bach fugues? And it was like, no, not the Bach fugues. So it ended up being the pop music angle, and from there I really wanted to talk about like Sufjan Stevens was really my jam at the time. And what I liked so much and still do about Sufjan Stevens is his use of timbre and the weird sounds that he puts together, and just sounded so different to me from a lot of other popular music. And so we were gonna email his record label, Asthmatic Kitty, and ask for some of the like master tracks, because for analyzing timbre the way that I do, it really helps to have individually recorded instruments rather than the full texture. And at first they were like, yeah, that'd be great, sure, I'm sure he'll be on board with that. It seems like the kind of thing he'd be into. And I was like, sweet. And then they got back to me and they were like, actually, he told us that he records on all this old-fashioned, terrible analog equipment. And so there's really no like master track. Like a bunch of things are kind of pre-mixed before they get to the master track, because he recorded them on like a cassette tape, you know.
That's very Sufjan Stevens.
Yeah.
In a cabin in Michigan or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was like, of course. Okay. So scrapped that idea. Just started to think like, okay, a keyboardist, so I wanted to do something keyboardy, and I was like, I love like the Hammond B3 organ. And then I was like, I don't have access to a Hammond B3 organ, and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, so I was like, where is it gonna go if I buy one? And they cost, a couple $1,000s, and then you have to pay someone to move it. It's like, okay, this isn't practical. And my advisor was like, why don't you look into the Yamaha DX7, because he was a big 80s guy. He plays in a cover band and knows a lot about that repertoire. And he was like, there are still plenty of them on the used market. It'll only set you back like $500, and it's just a synthesizer keyboard, so it's like a regular size keyboard that definitely can fit in the apartment. And it was really important, and nobody's really done much work on it. And I was like, okay. So we went that direction. But like, it was really like the Sufjan stuff that made me interested in timbre in the first place. That's really what I wanted to talk about. And then I just I think it also went along with keyboard stuff and synthesizers and stuff like that. Because I talked about my singing career as it was mostly just Renaissance music, Renaissance choral music. But as far as playing piano goes, like growing up, I was always playing a lot of pop music, and only played classical music to the extent that it would get me into music school. So, yeah. Everything just kind of came together eventually, but it took a little while to get there.
So
That's
if people
awesome.
aren't familiar with what a DX7 sounds like, can you direct them to maybe an artist or maybe a song that, like, that sound, that's a DX7?
Yeah, it's the electric piano sound that most people recognize the most easily. And it sounds somewhat like the sound in Dire Dire Docks from Super Mario 64. I feel like a lot of people know that water level in Super Mario 64.
Yes.
Obviously, that's
Never
not
thought of
actually a DX7, but it's very much like that sound. It's kind of buried in the mix in Careless Whisper by George Michael. And yeah, it's that 80s, very extremely 80s ballad electric piano sound. Yeah.
You were saying that you had like a hesitation to teach timbre to undergrads, and I think that's really relatable to a lot of people out there, that like we want to teach timbre, we want to be inclusive in our pedagogy with different parameters of music, but then you get to the point where, how do I actually do that? What exactly am I teaching in terms of timbre? Because even timbre itself, there's so many different ways you can go about it. And then you get back to the drawing board and you're like, okay, well, where should I start? Or what is one particular lesson that I could do? So maybe I view you as like a real expert to go to what do you recommend for those out there that are listening and saying to themselves, what am I going to do in my class for timbre? Is there something, obviously we don't want to do just one class on timbre and leave it alone. That's not what I'm saying. I don't want to get misinterpreted, but I'm saying, let's say you sit down and you think, I want to focus on timbre, right? Mm-hmm. What is it that you would recommend doing as a even just a starting point?
Like, one that I think works really well is actually not my article, but Kate Heidemann's 2016 MTO article, which is about vocal timbre. And the reason I like that one, so my worry with my approach is that it's a little bit technological. Like, you have to do stuff on your computer, and kids these days, they can't use computers. You know what I mean? It's true. It's not a joke.
No, it is true, yeah.
They're really bad at using their computers, and I'm like a little bit afraid of asking them to like open an MP3, for example, in a program. And so I kind of don't want to like get into that can of worms with them. I'm like afraid of troubleshooting their technology forever. Anyway, so Kate Heidemann's article is all about like the importance of mimesis, of the cognitive process of like wanting to mimic the vocal sounds that you're hearing, and the way that can allow you to kind of embody the different timbres and help you to analyze it actually by observing the things that your body does when you imagine what it would be like to sing as these other people. And so that's a very low-tech way of approaching timbre that I find works really well, because kind of anybody can do it. It requires people to be willing to feel a little bit silly as they try to mimic these timbres. But another thing that's really cool about it is it lets vocalists have the upper hand on everybody else in the theory classroom, which is a feeling they don't often have.
Love that.
And so my vocalists love that. They love being like, I get this. I know how to make my voice do that thing, and like kind of getting to be the ones explaining it to the keyboardists. Like, haha, So I feel like that's one of the most approachable ways to get into timbre if you do have to do a quick in and out, and you don't have a lot of lessons to spend on it. I think that might be the way that I would go, because the way that I analyze timbre with like spectrograms and stuff, you're opening the audio file in a program like Sonic Visualizer. Sonic Visualizer as a program is just kind of a pain to use. It's like not super intuitive at all. It's very much like the way computer programs were when I was growing up, which is why I'm able to use it. But like nowadays, we expect a lot more out of our software in terms of user design than Sonic Visualizer gives us. And so I think it would require a more dedicated, extensive unit to do it that way. Yeah, but I think you could talk about like timbre adjacent things as well. You could talk about like texture and instrumentation without needing to get too much into that. And that's also stuff that's really important and underemphasized in theory classes that I think could be more useful.
Yeah,
for
maybe
sure.
that's what
I've started
timbre adjacent. We had a thing where we identified different layers, and we had a chart that we kind of filled in, and it was different. It was all pop stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't know, maybe this is a good starting point, maybe it's not. It was a try, it was an attempt.
I think it's nice to have them be aware of that, because they maybe have not been,
Yeah.
Very true.
For sure.
Yeah. I've started just even asking the question, what instruments do you hear when I play a recording or something in class, because it's amazing how bad they are at answering that question.
Yeah.
They, even on things like jazz tunes, I've had students call a clarinet a trumpet, or, just things where you're like, no, that's not what that is.
Yeah.
So, just training them to think about, like, what are those individual sounds is a step in the right direction, and not something that it's certainly not something I experienced in theory class.
Yeah, definitely not. No.
And the reason why those sounds are in certain layers, right? Why is the trumpet playing the melody and not the bass clarinet or something like that?
Right.
Like timbre is a big, important thing in the levels or the kind of the layers of a arrangement, right?
Yeah, kind of related to that, I've started teaching topic theory a lot more in my undergraduate and graduate classrooms both, because I find that a really good way to get into other aspects of music that maybe we don't usually get to talk about. And instrumentation is so important for topics that that's kind of another way in, maybe, that could be useful. Like, so if the bass clarinet is playing the melody, what does that seem to suggest narratively about the music?
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, or even taking... What I try to do also is get two different versions of the same song. That way you're purposely looking at, okay, it was the same, lead sheet symbols or whatever, but what was it that was changed, and then why would you do that, or why does it make it sound different, and like questions like that.
Yeah.
As a starting point. I don't know. I was just spitballing, honestly. But I think a lot of people are at the spitballing stage with this,
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons for all the spitballing is the lack of kind of terms and labels and all these things for these concepts. And you've kind of coined some terms. I love the complement chorus, which is a great SMT video that you put out a couple years ago, and other things. So can you talk to us about the challenge that part of this analysis is that there isn't an agreed upon terms, and then the decision to be like, we're going to call it this, and how does imposter syndrome set in with that type of activity?
That's a great and complex question. With the complement chorus specifically, I should point out that my advisor, Mark Spicer, is the one who came up with the nice term. I called it something terrible that I can't remember anymore, like the alternate chorus or something that is just so much more clumsy and dry. And he was like, the complement chorus. And I was like, oh, it's got the alliteration. It's just a nicer sounding word than alternate. And it's more specific and more correct. And I was like, yep, okay. So, credit where credit is due. I think Mark Spicer can be quite a wordsmith. So then with the timbre stuff, that was really difficult. But so I should also say that I decided on these terms for the most part when I was writing my dissertation, which is now 1 million years ago. And a lot of new timbre research has come out since then. But when I was reviewing the literature that was available to me at the time, it was mostly very scientific type words to describe timbre. And I was just, and all of the music information retrieval based literature and all of the cognition-based literature all uses these technical terms as well, spectral centroid, spectral flux, stuff like that. And I was like, that doesn't mean anything to most musicians. And so I really wanted to keep kind of colloquial terms in play, but just we can still say brightness means this spectral centroid measurement, but I think it's more helpful. I think it makes your work more intelligible to just go ahead and call it brightness. And I'll leave it to somebody else to problematize that. But I think it's okay. I think we can say it's brightness. The cognition research has kind of shown that, and so it's maybe a little bit imposter syndrome-y because it's that's what I think it sounds like. So, but I think most people agree. I haven't really gotten much pushback on any of the terms. People seem to pretty much get it. I did want it to just, because we have so much intuitive metaphorical language that we just kind of absorb in our lives as musicians, and it's like an acquired language that you learn and don't think about too critically. You just think about oh, I've heard people call this. You don't even think about it. You just, because you hear people call this kind of thing warm, you start calling it warm too. And warm is one term that I really don't like because it can mean anything. And basically what I say is, I think when people say timbres are warm, they just mean this is a sound that I like.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. I feel like in all instrument lessons, everybody is told to produce a good warm sound, but like what that means for their instrument is totally different from instrument to instrument. Like if you want it to be brighter or darker or whatever, it depends on, it's like, depends on what
That's
your
so
instrument
true.
is.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it like as someone who's a trained singer and a trained horn player.
Yeah.
And on horn, that means a completely different thing than if my voice teacher said that to me.
Right.
So even in those two contexts in the same human being, it's not the same thing.
Can you
That's
be,
really
I'm curious
interesting,
for you to be more specific, like what you would interpret that to mean from different teachers.
Well, I think on horn, if somebody told me to have a nice warm sound, I'm going to go for not brassy, like a more kind of legato, richer toned sound. We don't use vibrato ever on horn, but it would be like leaning in that direction where you've got a really smooth flowing sound. On voice, if they tell me to be warmer, I'm going to be darker. So, yeah, if my voice teacher was like, I need a warmer sound there, she means don't be so forward.
Yeah.
Put it a little further back in your placement.
Yeah, and I do think those things probably both shy away from, like, I think in both cases it means not too bright. So it is, in a way, an opposition to brightness, but also just that people throw the term around in other ways too, like to talk about like lo-fi production in, like, you know, like the lo-fi trend, you know what I mean, like lo-fi beats to study / relax to or whatever. I feel like that will get called warm, and it doesn't necessarily mean like the opposite of bright, but it just means kind of like
chill,
a little bit gritty and chill, and just like makes me feel cozy, makes me feel good. Like it can be that too. So anyway, this is a big tangent.
I love it.
We like tangents.
Because I totally went with like the lower overtones interpretation of that. When you
it's like it is part of that, but that's not the whole story, I think.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just think it's a really wishy-washy term sometimes.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. I am now working on a new project with a dissertation advisee of mine who's now finished. So I really bought into his dissertation because he was going to do stuff like analyzing timbre basically with my methodology, but he wanted to specialize it for unpitched metallic percussion. And so, which I don't really do at all in that article that you're talking about. I really focus a lot more on pitched sounds. And so he sort of came up with his own oppositional vocabulary based on his own spectrogram analyses of his own playing of different tambourines and triangles and crash cymbals. And he wants to use different terms because they reflect what percussionists say when they talk about the timbres of their instruments. And interesting to me is that there's different words for different instruments, and even kind of like the same, what I would think of as the same phenomenon in different instruments gets referred to differently depending on which instrument you're talking about. And so I kind of have to take his word on this because I'm not a percussionist, but like it'll be like, it's called we can call it brightness in like tambourines, I think, but it's like brilliance in triangles, or maybe the other way around.
Oh, I could see that. Yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh, this makes me think of. I hope I'm right about this, but I think I am. But there's actually a Fred Armisen little comedic bit because he's a drummer and he's talking about cymbals and how all drummers describe every cymbal they like as being warm.
See?
I think he says warm in that.
I didn't even know it's a Fred Armisen bit. But that makes me feel very justified.
Yeah. So it's a thing, but I'm a keyboardist too. But when I think of warm, I think of like a closely voiced, like major ninth chord or something like that. That's warm to me.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the tone, but like the
like because piano like basically can't sound warm.
It can't be warm, right?
Sorry, we're just always going to be like ding, ding, ding. Yeah.
Yep. Never crescendoing, just always crescendoing. But that's so interesting. I mean, just this little tangent. We're all coming to this different sound image for this one word. Can you imagine a point where we can come to any type of agreement, or like,
Not with warm.
not with warm, maybe not with warm. Warm will be like the cadential 6/4 of timbre. But can you imagine, or what would it take 100 years from now eventually to get to a point where we have these kind of terms or language like we do in other areas? Or maybe is timbre too slippery of a topic to do that?
I think it might be. I think there's some things that we can really agree upon, and cognition research has kind of shown that. I mentioned spectral centroid. The research is pretty strong that correlates to what people would describe as brightness. I can't remember what the fancy term is for what's basically hollowness, where like a clarinet timbre, where the even numbered overtones are not sounded. That's another one that's like pretty clearly like understood and correlates to language in a specific way among musicians. There's another one, I think, like just spectral flux is like basically the attack profile, so I don't know. But there's certain terms that work better than others, I think. So like brightness and hollowness are pretty clear to people. And so I think by extension, darkness and maybe like fullness, which is what I say the opposite of hollow would be. I think their opposite terms are likewise kind of well understood.
Yeah.
But then there's always going to be these like, I don't know. It would take a lot. I think it would take an agreement in the theory textbooks or something to kind of standardize that language, because like I said, we just kind of receive it in the wild. We pick it up on the job, and nobody ever teaches us how to describe timbre. So we just go for it. You just go with your gut, and you're like, it sounds warm. Or, other really obvious timbre adjectives are things that describe the materiality of the object, which is a big pet peeve for my advisee. His name is Michael Barranco, by the way. That's a really big pet peeve of his when people are discussing percussion instruments. Like, it sounds metallic. It's like, yeah, true. It's like not very helpful.
Right.
Yeah. So we can agree on those terms, but it's maybe not super interesting to do so.
Right, we would have to talk about them, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you've had pushback from mentors or fellow theorists or anything in this kind of analysis. And it could be, maybe in the timbre area or maybe in the popular kind of pop music area. I love it was either going to be pop music or Bach, right? I think like we all have this like, well, we should be analyzing, Bach or Brahms or, Schubert or something, but, something pulls us in this direction.
Yeah.
Was it difficult for you to kind of go in this direction, or did you receive any feedback or pushback?
I did get advised this way. So I got my PhD at CUNY, where if I'd gone the Bach route, I would have basically had to have Bill Rothstein be my advisor, versus going the pop route, having Mark Spicer be my advisor. It was like, those are kind of, it was known that was who I would study with if I did either of these things. But so I set up a time to talk with Bill about it, and he was like very like brutally honest. He was like, Bach studies is a really mean field. Like, there's a lot of people who know a lot of stuff, and if you don't learn all of it, then nobody's going to take you seriously. And so, like, okay, you really like the well-tempered clavier, but, like, there's all these fugues in the organ works. Like, how well do you know all the organ works and things like that? And, he was just like, it's such a really well-established field. And I was wanting to do like Schenkerian analysis with it too. So like that, again, it's like, it's kind of a mean subfield of music theory. And he was basically like, I just don't think it's a good call. Like, it's a hostile environment where people aren't going to be that excited to hear about what you have to say. And so I was like, well, okay, That sounds good. Meanwhile, Mark Spicer is like, yeah, come over here, do this. We need this. And so that definitely helped me make my decision. And yeah, I had really enjoyed Schenkerian analysis. I do really like early music. I still love playing Bach, and but I'm really glad that I went the way it did. It's clear to me that this was the better choice in retrospect, but the Bach felt a lot more comfortable too, because it's well, here's the methodology and here's the repertoire, go, and I had been educated really well in those areas, whereas I hadn't received any education on timbre, any formal education. I'd only taken one pop music course, which was a course on the Beatles, and so it was it was very much jumping into the deep end to decide to do my dissertation on timbre and pop music. And Mark Spicer isn't a timbre expert. He's a pop music expert, but he's not a timbre expert. And so, yeah, it was a lot more scary to go that way, but it worked out fine. Got an outside reader to be the timbre expert, and yeah, it's all gone okay since then.
Well, that's the thing. That's what moves us forward. If you just do the thing that's the most typical, where do we go from there? You know what I mean? Just, sheesh.
Yeah.
Man, that's
yeah.
great.
That's people
really
always
cool.
laugh when I tell them I thought about doing like my other thought was to do Schenkerian analysis of Bach. They're like, no.
They just start shaking their head immediately. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Great.
But I do know a lot about Schenkerian analysis, actually, so you just wouldn't know it from my research output. But I got that CUNY pedigree, I don't think they're doing as much Schenker anymore, but yeah, I took a lot of Schenker at CUNY and at Florida State too, where I got my master's.
I know that you've also done some work in kind of video game music analysis, going back to Sonic the Hedgehog,
yeah,
original Sega. What you're kind of exploring these other kind of musical genres that we don't often analyze, I guess. I mean, Ben, I know you're into Zelda. You love Zelda, but can you talk to us about maybe how we should be more open to video game music, for example, or other kind of musical genres that we find in our current context?
Yeah, I think part of it is having the tools to talk about them. So it kind of goes back to the timbre discussion in that way. And likewise, again, topic theory is really useful for talking about music and media. I'm teaching a music and media seminar this semester, and I wanted it to just be video game music, but the other faculty here were like, I don't know if enough students would sign up for that. So I just changed it to music and media in general, and talked about film music and video game music, even though I told my students this too. I was like, I don't watch that many movies, honestly, so that's not going to be my expertise that I'm bringing to the table. But luckily we have one of those people that's seen every movie ever and knows everything about everything. So luckily that's been made up for by a student in the class. But anyway, what was I talking about? Topic theory is really useful for that. And I think, for video game music, I can only really speak to video game music for the reasons I just said. For video game music, sure, there is still it's great because there's use of traditional tonal idioms, but then there's also pop idioms and jazz idioms and atonal idioms. You can find anything in video game music. And
I was going to tell you, I'm teaching this diatonic modes on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I was going to start class with the Halo theme. You know, with that low E. And it has it's like a chant. E with two sharps, and then sometimes you'll see the second sharp in the key signature. Sometimes you'll see it in a transcription on the C sharp or whatnot. And I was going to start talking about modes with the Halo theme, and I think this is relatable, but I don't know. I'm just trying it, and we'll see what happens. But I think a lot of people know the Halo theme from the game.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. I used to feel like I wasn't older enough than my students, and I feel more and more, obviously this is a banal statement, but I feel more and more every year that they're a different species, and I don't know, have they played Halo?
I don't know.
I'm always asking them questions like that, and sometimes they're like, yes, and I'm like, well, I don't know don't know what you do.
Yeah. My students didn't know who Ben Folds was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that was one of those
they
moments.
Did not. I missed
Did
that.
not.
They
Had
did.
never heard of him.
Yeah.
They did not know
Had
Ben
not.
Folds.
he
Interesting.
Had never heard of him. And I was like, okay. Well, and
Yeah.
Parks and Rec, that's another one. I was teaching
Yeah.
sequences, I think, and I played the theme song to Parks and Rec, and a bunch of the students were like, is this from a
This means
TV
nothing
show?
to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Now they all know
shocked
The
when I was
Office.
teaching- Yeah, I was shocked when I was teaching Neo-Romanian. They were like, oh, an L transformation is the Office theme. I was like, I didn't even bother bringing that up because I thought none of you would watch that show. But you are correct. It is an L transformation.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so we're kind of like always like chasing after, what students know, or and I guess that might be the issue with doing popular styles is, if you are doing, classical or romantic period music, you've got the repertoire there. It doesn't matter if they know it or not, right? Is it ever a challenge analyzing music that's more and teaching it meant to be disposable? Is that an issue? I mean, because popular music is this kind of consumable good, right? You listen to it, you get it stuck in your head, and then it goes away, and you get something else, right? Does that play a role in what we choose to include in the canon? Maybe even think about going forward, what music makes it? And of course, we can't know for certain, but does the nature of popular music does that make it a challenge?
I think there's a lot of things you can still teach that are like kind of timeless, I guess. I mean, like the form of pop songs has stayed like mainly the same with some little tweaks here and there, like the complement chorus being a thing for these songs, but also like Alyssa Barna has the dance chorus concept that's popular for songs of that era. And so I think we keep having these little spins on it, but still basically like verse chorus form remains really important. And the things it can be interesting to talk about what makes things sound versy and sound chorusy. And like there's still stock chord progressions that I think are worth teaching to students so that they can, I think it helps with from an oral skills perspective, like being able to recognize these 4 chord chunks will help you break these things down faster than if you're just going one chord to the next one chord to the next one chord. So, and like syncopation and phrase structure, I mean, all of these things are kind of set in stone for, not for all time, but I think it is like kind of generally true that pop music is still constructed that way.
I think one of the interesting things about where we're at with popular music now is because of Spotify and a lot of the SoundCloud, a lot of the services like that, things are so tailored, and there's kind of not a set, I mean, when I was in high school, everybody listened to the same 3 radio stations, so we all kind of knew the same songs.
Right.
And that's not how it works now at all.
Yeah.
And that can be a big downside, but it can also be a big upside, because I've noticed that a lot of my students have been exposed to music from the 70s or 80s or 90s that they maybe never would have encountered otherwise, but it sounded sort of like something they liked on Spotify, and so now it's feeding into their algorithm. So I have found that some of the older stuff, they actually do know.
Yeah.
If it's managed to find its way into their algorithms somehow or another.
Yeah, I think when I was like, do you all know who Prince is? I think that was one that got me scoffed at. They were like, we're not stupid. I'm like, okay, all right. Sorry. Or it was like Elton John, I think. It was, it's like something like that where I'm like, do you kids even know who this is? And they're like,
But then you can have, so I have a bigger class, and what happens in my class a lot of the times, we did Herbie Hancock, Watermelon Man. Half the class is like, of course. And then the other half is like, Herbie who? And it was like, then they were scoffing at the other side of the room, So even like within the class,
that's a jazz
like,
thing though, right? It's all the jazzers.
Yeah, so the jazz are like, of course, of course.
That's also a very divisive tune, because I teach that song in jazz theory as well, and they either love it or hate it. And they will mimic that opening like flute riff. Yes. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
So it's kind of
iconic.
interesting. Even if you pick something, you may still have, that group that really knows it and loves it and, man, follows it to a T, but then others are completely clueless to who Herbie Hancock even is.
Right. I don't think you can assume everyone in your class knows any piece of music at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, there's just so many different kinds of people in our classes that, yeah. And, like, we kind of don't believe in the canon so much anymore, so
Right.
it's like you can't be like, you can't just assume everybody knows even, like, Beethoven symphonies necessarily.
Oh, yeah, no, they don't. They don't.
Yep.
And it's like, that's okay. But it just means, like, I don't know. I just think pedagogically it's important to be aware that you can't just assume. Or, like, even the songs that I may have sung growing up as a kid that I feel like are just like, oh, these are just children's songs everybody knows. It's like, well, no. Like, they all come from different places and everything, too. So, even, I don't know, I can't assume they all know, like, I've been working on the railroad or something. I don't know why that's the one that came to my mind. That feels like one that might actually be racist. I'll have to Google that.
Well, I was just going to say, some of them have been, nixed now, too, for those reasons. But, yeah.
I feel like that might be one of them. As I say the title, I'm like, sounds like has the potential to be racist.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, the little radar goes off there. Maybe not do that one.
You always just have to go to Google. I have a 2-year-old now, and there's been a few of those where I'm like, wait, is this racist? And I think it was like, I can't remember. There was one that was like, actually, this isn't racist. You might have assumed that it was racist, but it was not. I feel like it was like 5 Little Monkeys or something. I was like, I feel like monkeys could be a substitution for something more insidious, but I Googled it and it was like, no, not this one. Not this time.
That's I feel like that's a musicologist's calling right there. Create some type of online resource for, like, is this song racist?
Racist or no?
Racist or no?
Just a quick yes, no, yeah.
Popular musicology right there.
Just erase all the nuance. Just everything has to be yes or no. No kind ofs.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, wow. That's a spin-off podcast or something right there.
Maybe.
I did just find it, like, so funny, though, that, like, the Google results were, like, it was like a suggested search, like, is 5 Little Monkeys racist? And there were, like, tons of things being, like, in fact is not racist. Like, because so many people have the same train of thought.
Right,
like,
same thought,
wait a minute. Yeah.
Which is probably good. It's probably good that people are asking that question, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With a 2-year-old, like, with these little kids, it's like you just want to keep them pure and cocooned and like in nothing but light and goodness. So it's like I don't want them absorbing any hint of anything weird.
Yeah.
Right.
I tried showing her, she really loves animals, and I was like, oh, I'm going to show her this video, Everybody Wants to Be a Cat from the Aristocats, and that has a super racist part in it, and I was like, oh dear, look away.
Yeah.
Look away.
We ran into that the other day, too. My daughter's also 2. Same situation.
Yeah.
You
I was
think,
like, oh,
it's
yikes.
Disney, but no, don't do it.
Disney's,
Don't go there.
Old Disney is real sketch that way.
Yeah.
All the time. So,
I was like, I just wanted her to sing about how she would like to be a cat. I think she would.
Disney has to make it racist. So, I mean, I think this kind of could segue to maybe this question on curriculum, right? Because that is an issue. Is that we want to have an inclusive classroom. We want to diversify the music that we're having our students listen to, diversify the types of composers that we are introducing to them to. And so have you found any ways that you've been successfully able to maybe diversify your curriculum, or maybe some advice or tips for people who are just looking for other ways to kind of diversify their theory curriculum?
There's a lot of resources for, like, more classical based courses. Like, there's the I can't remember what it's called, but there's a spreadsheet of music by Black composers broken down by various theory topics that is circulating.
Composers of Color Research Project.
That's it, yeah.
Yes.
And there's music theory examples by women as well. And so those are kind of like some easy ways, like kind of the low-hanging fruit ways that you can just, swap one of these out for one of those. Mm-hmm. And if nothing else, you've done that. And so, because I think it is important to recognize like the labor issues aspect of this, like especially for contingent faculty, mm-hmm. for graduate students, people who are just overworked and underpaid, like you do have to be aware that like the materials that are available for easy use are often part of the problem of perpetuating this, but then it's like, I don't have time to write a new theory textbook. So, so I acknowledge that, but it's obviously, that's not like the best change. Really what I try to advocate for is having more repertoire-focused theory courses and focusing on different kinds of repertoire besides Western concert music. So now at Mason, I mainly just teach theory for 20th and 21st century music, where I do set theory, and I do like, I call it triadic post-tonality, like stuff with triads that's not tonal. And then I do music and media for the last unit. And that last unit really helps open things up to a lot of different kinds of composers. And I think it really helps to just talk about some different kinds of music. And then the other course that I teach is a pop and jazz course, which just is kind of like, it's super easy to be inclusive and diverse in that setting, because there's just so much music to choose from. So yeah, I think there are things you can do if you are staying focused in a Western art music context. If you go outside of that, it is really easy to be more inclusive. So it depends on that. I think even like another really low-hanging fruit, I think, is communicating clearly to the students that all of these classes are pretty much repertoire based, whether you acknowledge it or not. So just keeping in mind if you're at a school where the traditional theory curriculum is there to stay, we're not interested in a pop class here, things like that. I think you can still like change it to say like, this is a course about 18th century music in Europe, and that at least helps the students realize that what they're learning is music theory for 18th century European music and not music theory, period, the end, all of music theory.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, well, we are getting close to the end of our time. Time has flown. This has been great to chat with you, Megan. But before we go, we always like to kind of have some rapid fire questions. This is your opportunity to, make those hot takes, little Twitter bites. All right. And so, Jen or Ben, do you have a question? I think I have someone at the door, so I'm going to
I have
talk
one.
to them. All right. So why don't you take it away, Jen?
I'll go. What is your favorite song you've studied that uses the Yamaha DX7?
I really love What's Love Got to Do With It, which I use.
Oh, that's such a good song.
It's so well constructed, and the more time I spent with it, the more I was like, what a gem of a song. Yeah.
It has staying power too. It's still a song people know and recognize, and yeah.
Yeah. That harmonica solo is pretty whack, but other than that.
This definitely has a personal bias to it because I'm super into film music. What's your favorite piece of film music?
Uh-oh, I don't have a quick answer. I don't know. I mean, I love the first Lord of the Rings movie.
Oh, yeah.
So... But I don't know, like...
Is that the one that starts with the Phrygian chant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, are you thinking like the da-da-da-da-da? Or like it starts out with like...
Yeah.
I was just trying to remember which one that was.
It's like an elf's melody or something like that. Because, they're the ones.
That's a good one. Yeah, Lord of the Rings is good. Lord of the Rings, too.
All right. So I'm going to go with my old classic. 164, 564, or CAD 64,
Why are
or
you
something
doing
else?
So I do 564. I'll allow CAD 64. I'll allow it. It's fine.
It's permissible, just not that 164. Get that out of here.
Yeah. It's not helpful.
Yeah.
I just taught a classical form class it was a year ago, actually. I taught a classical form seminar to my graduate students last year, and there were some people that just never got it. And the thing is, it makes them miss cadences, because for example, if the 164 is on the first half of the bar and the resolution's in the second half, and they're only analyzing one chord per measure, then they don't see the cadence and obviously they need to listen, but whatever. They don't see the cadence because they see 164 and then 1, and it's like, no, that was a 5 chord. And if you labeled it 564 and never did 164 like I told you to, you would have found the 5 chord in the second half of the measure, So yeah, it's gotta be 5. I'm sorry.
Valid point.
Yeah, I went to CUNY. We're all Shankarians, like I said.
Gotta go back to Shank.
Yeah.
Awesome. So as we're wrapping up, can you just let our listeners know kind of where they can find you on the internet, and kind of what you have cooking as far as your research now?
I am 100% on the internet. I have a website that's just meganlavengood.com. I'm on Twitter. That's my social media of choice. No Facebook for me. I tried it, didn't like it. Sometimes I can't remember who said, do you ever feel like we know too much about other people now? That's what Facebook is like for me. I started to know too much about other people. Anyway, what I've got in the works right now is, I'm presenting a paper in New Orleans about the winter topic in video game music, and it's definitely going in a new direction for me, because I collaborated with my husband, who's a data scientist, to do a computational approach to that, and I'd never done anything like that before in any class or research project of mine at all. So it's a fun subject to talk about winter levels in video games. So I think it keeps with the fun-loving trend of my research.
So what is a cold sound, or a
what do
windy?
you think?
Oh.
Because I want to know how valid my opinion is. Yeah.
I'm trying to picture in Zelda what the music is when it's when he's running through the snow and stuff like that. I can't think of it. I've only watched my fiance play Zelda. I haven't played it myself, but I've seen all the seasons.
In Breath
happen.
of the Wild, I didn't get a very strong winter topic vibe from the snowy levels there, actually.
That makes sense, because I don't remember it sounding, other than the way because his feet sound different when he runs in different environments.
You always get a lot of wind, but that's not really the music.
That's true.
I'll have to listen to next time my girls are playing Animal Crossing and it happens to be winter time. See if the music is different there.
The way the music changes from a sunny day to a snowy day in Animal Crossing is a perfect example that I use in the talk of what winter music means. And so what they do is they take away the drum set. There's no more drum set, and replace it with sleigh bells. And the bass line is played on the marimba instead of the electric bass guitar, or I think they use acoustic bass. Whatever, the bass of whatever type is no longer there, and instead the bass line is played by marimba, and they add glockenspiel to the melody. Yeah. So what we're going to say the 5 important characteristics are of winter is an absence of drums.
Don't tell us all, because people have to come to your
presentation. I'll probably
presentation.
forget one.
Give us 3.
Absence of drums and sleigh bells.
Okay, that's 2 out of 5. Awesome.
Just metallic percussion in general.
That's great. Oh my gosh! Next time my girls are playing, I'll be like, "Tell me when it's winter up there," because I can't stand watching them play that game because it's so boring to me. But they love
my
that
brother
game.
calls it a chores game.
Well, my
I tried
kids
to
are
get
9
him to
and
play
11,
it. He was like, "I don't play video games to do chores."
I know.
I don't want to clean up the island. Can I pay somebody else to do it?
Exactly. Like
awesome.
you don't want to clean up your room, but you're picking
Yeah.
up all the sticks in the forest. Like
Right. Yes. I do like to do chores in video games, so I do like Animal Crossing.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. You just made it to the end of another episode of Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review the podcast, and you can always reach us at notedoctorspodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or show ideas. Thanks for listening.